Thanks. I'm Kathleen Cavell. I'm part of the leadership team at Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts. Many of you have been on these forums before as audience, and as you know, we send them to you when they're a day or two later when we have the recording, and you can watch them later. They're on our website as well. Uh, we're very we're very involved in two ballot question campaigns at the moment. One is the stipend reform question, which is many of us are circulating petitions for. We need, as always, we need 75,000 signatures in order to get these on the 2026 Massachusetts ballot. And we have signature gatherers working on it, but we also are signature gatherers ourselves. The other, and that one means a lot to PDM and to the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature, which is the outfit that put this on, that got this on the ballot. More about that, if you like, you can look us up. The PDM website is Progressive Dems of Mass, and you can also go to the Kroll website. We'll put that into the chat. The other ballot question that we feel very strongly about, as do many others, is the rent stabilization question. Massachusetts, as you perhaps know, did away with rent control in 1994 as a statewide matter, even though the three municipalities, Brookline, Boston, Cambridge, that had rent control voted overwhelmingly to keep it. But the real estate lobby won out on that one. And times have changed a lot. Circumstances have changed a lot, as all of us know. And PDM wants to do what we can to help support that ballot question, which would provide a different form of rent control statewide. And we have today to talk about this two of the people I think are the best qualified Massachusetts people, maybe beyond Massachusetts, to discuss what the need and why it's structured the way it is and what it would do to help with the housing crisis that all of us are terribly aware of in Massachusetts, and which has cost us incalculable amounts and continues to do so. We lose people to other more affordable places all the time. And we have families and people with Massachusetts roots who can't afford to live here, can't afford to stay here. So we all know about it. And tenants in particular are, as we'll discuss, are victimized in many ways by the lack of any sort of limits on what nowadays many corporate landlords are charging. So here we have Mark Martinez from Mass Law Reform, who's a housing attorney, and he's waving at you. Prior to joining, he was 3 years working for State Senator Patricia Jalen as legal counsel and budget director. And he also at the State House co-founded the Beacon Block, a collective of staffers organizing around cultural and institutional changes on Beacon Hill, sorely needed. He holds a bachelor's, we won't worry about that. He will talk to us about the rent stabilization question on the ballot and about the whole circumstance of our housing crisis here. We also are lucky enough to have Carolyn Chu, who is the director, hold on one sec, because I have it right here, of Homes for All Massachusetts, a statewide collective of grassroots housing justice groups. And she was executive director of the Asian American Resource Workshop before that. And she helped build Dorchester Not for Sale, which brings together a lot of neighborhood residents to fight for a whole lot of things, jobs and affordable housing and equitable planning. So I will not take any more time, but I just want to say that PDM is delighted to have all of you here and to have them to talk to us today about an issue that that we're hoping will get on the ballot next year. And we're hoping to build enough momentum here so that when the real estate lobby interests spend a fortune to try to defeat this ballot question, we'll have a whole bunch of advocates and activists who know about it and will help us make it, let it pass, get it passed. Passed. Okay, thanks a lot. And here we go. Would you start, please, Mark?
Yeah, hi. Can everybody hear me? We're good. Beautiful. Hi, everybody. Good to see a bunch of you again. And so, yeah, I'm here to talk about kind of why now? Why are we going to the ballot? How did we get here? And then a couple other things. And so, I want to start. Kathleen mentioned, when rent control was banned in '94, and how we were in a really completely different time, in a completely different Massachusetts. For context, in 1994, I was 1 year old. Right, so it's been my entire life since we banned rent control in Massachusetts. And like Kathleen said, the places that had it, Boston, Cambridge, Brookline, all voted to keep it, right? It was the other parts of the state. It was Western Central Mass that did not have rent control. Sorry, my camera's doing weird things. That did not have rent control, that voted to ban it, and barely, right? Like it was, as much as they rely on this, how we banned rent control 30 years ago, right? It was by the skin of their teeth, they won this. And that is because uh, the parts of the state that didn't have rent control at the time were places where families could afford to live. That is not the case anymore. You can't just move out to central Western Mass and find an affordable Massachusetts anymore. That doesn't exist. I grew up in Western Mass. I was born and raised in Western Mass, and it's not affordable. My family's getting priced out of Western Mass, and I grew up in a small town where there really is not a whole lot going on. It doesn't have the industry that Worcester has that is driving up housing prices. It's the nature of what Massachusetts is now. It is completely unaffordable. My deep dark secret that I don't tell people, but I'll tell you all because we're friends, is that my dad was a landlord, and I remember what he used to charge for apartments, and for what he used to charge for a 3-bedroom apartment in my hometown. You can't find a studio apartment in my hometown for that price anymore, and that wasn't that long ago, right? That was 20 years ago. And so we're in a completely different landscape than we were when rent control was originally banned in Massachusetts. And then also, we're talking about a different policy. When people talk about what rent control looked like in Boston and Cambridge and Brookline in the 70s and 80s and 90s, one, I think a lot of people kind of blow certain things out of proportion. But even to the point that there were some negative consequences of that particular policy, that we're not talking about that policy, right? The rent stabilization policies of today are not the rent control policies of the 80s and the 90s. And so we're talking about a different scheme. We're talking about something different. And so when people talk about, kind of living through this, they haven't, right? That's not accurate. And so, from the moment that rent control was banned in Massachusetts, rents started to skyrocket, right? From the moment rent control was banned, Massachusetts started to become even more and more unaffordable, to the point where Boston is, depending on the list that you look at, sometimes the third, sometimes the second most expensive rental market in the country. Massachusetts as a whole is the fifth most expensive state in the country, as it pertains to cost of living. And that all started right at the time that we banned rent control. And there's other things at play here too, right? I want to be clear that no one here believes that rent control is a silver bullet, that if we pass rent control, we solve the housing crisis in Massachusetts. That's not what we're saying. We have to do a lot of other things, and we know that. But rent control, rent stabilization is what we need in order to keep families in their home now, so that they can stick around long enough to realize the benefits of these other things that we need to do: building affordable housing, zoning relief, all of these other things. And the movement has been building. When I first started coming around the state house, when I was in law school, like 2016-ish, right, rent control was still kind of that political third rail. You couldn't talk about it. You couldn't bring it up. It was not a serious policy solution on Beacon Hill, on City Hall. But that has obviously changed in a pretty short amount of time. Rent control has become a central part of this conversation. And so the question becomes, why are we going to the ballot? And the reason we're going to the ballot is because, we think it has unfortunately become very clear that the state house is not going to move on this. Right, the same reason lots of people go to the ballot. Ideally, we would love to have the state house do this. I don't think anyone here believes the ballot is the ideal way to pass law and to create policy. But when we have a legislature that does as little as ours does, and as ineffective as ours is, we have to go with what the options are in front of us, and we can't afford to wait. We can't wait another 10 years for the state house to finally catch up with this good policy, because we're losing too many families as it is right now. Every single day in every part of the Commonwealth, we are losing families. People are moving out. And so that's why we were going to the ballot. Couple things to note. The policy that's on the ballot is different than the bill, right? I believe, I'm pretty sure I've spoken to you all about a rent control bill in the past. And the ballot looks a decent amount different than the bill, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, as many of you know, because many of you are very experienced kind of ballot campaigners, the easiest way to lose a ballot is to confuse voters, is to make it too complicated. And the bill as drafted is a really complicated thing to put on a ballot. It has lots of different parts, and so there's some legal questions around relatability that means something to some of you, and for the rest of you, I won't bore you with a constitutional law lesson, but there were some concerns about its legality on the ballot, though I think we would have won that argument, but we'll put that to the side. And so the main differences between what's on the ballot and what is on and our bill is that our bill is a local option, and the ballot is not. The ballot is actually just statewide rent control. And then our bill includes just cause eviction protections, and the ballot does not. One, because of the legal issues that I mentioned, and two, what we learned from polling is that just cause is just too confusing for folks. It's a really hard thing to explain, and if it's a hard thing to explain, you shouldn't put it on the ballot, because that's a really easy way to make sure that you lose that ballot question. And so it's statewide rent control. And we did that, one, because it's a lot easier, and two, because it polled better. I think, which doesn't surprise me. I think we've convinced ourselves that people want moderate policies, but people actually want policies that are going to help them. And so I think for voters that are in these communities that they know their local city councils or select boards are not going to pass rent control, a local option doesn't do them a whole lot of good. And so that is what we were going to the ballot on. That's what we were really excited about. This would be a really strong rent stabilization policy for every renter in Massachusetts, with there are some exemptions within the policy. But renters everywhere in Massachusetts would feel the impact of the policy going to the ballot. So I think I'm going to stop there, unless there are particular things you want me to touch on, Kathleen, and I'll hand it over to Carolyn to kind of talk about.
The only thing I'd ask you to clarify, Mark, is when you say the differences between the ballot question and the bill, what is it that voters will actually produce, and how do those two fit together?
So you mean what are voters voting on?
Yes, and what will
Yeah.
happen if we vote, if it passes?
Yes. So what they're voting on is a pretty streamlined policy that would be statewide rent stabilization in Massachusetts that would limit rent increases to 5% or the increase in the consumer price index, or the cost of living, whichever is lower. And there are exceptions, right? There are exceptions for owner-occupied small landlords. So owner-occupied landlords in buildings with four or fewer units. Exceptions for things like public housing, because they're already regulated on the federal level, religious institutions. And then it's a 10-year new construction exemption. But the important thing for those of you that maybe got a little worried when we said there's not going to be just cause on this is the way we describe it is rent control is going to stays with the unit. And so landlords can't jack up the rent in between tenants. And so we are hoping that removes the incentive for them to try to use things like no fault evictions to get tenants out. And so we hope by having that, the control stay with the unit, that, like I said, we remove that incentive and really stabilizes prices across the board, regardless of whether someone is moving in or out. And so that is what is on the ballot. If we get this on the ballot, if we collect all the signatures that we need and voters vote yes on this, that will be the policy in Massachusetts.
Thank you. Please, Carolyn, you're on.
Great. Yeah, good to be with everyone today. And thanks, Mark, for setting all that up. So yeah, as I've been introduced. My name is Carolyn. I'm with Homes for All Massachusetts. Work closely with Mass Law Reform. Have been here talking about housing with y'all before, and it's always great to work together. I think as Mark said, right, we're continuing to pursue two strategies. So we both have our bill at the State House, which we will still have a hearing actually in the Housing Committee in November, and collecting signatures for this ballot question to continue to give us leverage to win rent control in some form uh, in the next year. And so, Mark talked about the differences between the bill and the ballot, but the other thing I'll just say that I found interesting as we were kind of doing our polling and viability work for the ballot is just that the impact that MBTA communities actually has had on people's pessimism that their municipal government will do anything on housing. And we think that's actually a part of why folks were really not interested in a local option at the in our focus group. So just that, we understand how like the politics are changing and kind of how these different pieces fit together. But yeah, we are running a robust campaign to get on the ballot. We are running a grassroots campaign. This is like volunteers, community organizations, starting to get unions involved, collecting signatures. We you all know from talking about stipend reform, we need to collect 75,000 certified signatures by the middle of November. And so we are currently ramping up. The website has campaign information, some FAQs, that stuff. It has a general get involved link if you talk to folks who want to just get involved. Before PDM folks, we'd also, love to just get you all petitions to be collecting as you're doing other things. We are mostly doing that from the Field First office in downtown Boston, but we have sites in Springfield, Lynn, Worcester. Um, we can get folks stuff out of Brockton, the Merrimack Valley. So, and we can mail. So we're happy to work directly with folks to get petitions. If you email that email, we can work with you. And yeah, we need to be in every corner of the state. We're starting to max out in Suffolk County, so we're really looking to be outside of Suffolk County. We are excited that No Kings is a real opportunity for us to be talking to folks, particularly people who are newly activated, right? Through the federal catastrophes, to say this is something we can actually do here in Massachusetts that is forward looking, that is bold, that is supportive to working class communities. So I think, really wanting to be on the ground for that. And yeah, I think the reception's been really good across the state. And I think to what Mark was saying, right? We know this is not a Boston, Worcester issue anymore, Somerville, Cambridge, right? Like this is something that folks are seeing. I mean, I got a cold email from a senior in Lunenburg who was like, this new corporate landlord bought my building and my rent's gone up 10% a year for the last 5 years. Like, if you bring me petitions, I'll get everyone in this building to sign. I mean, this is that's like not Boston or Worcester, a town like that. And so I think it speaks to the reality and how much I think we are in such a crisis that this does actually really this is not just a super small like issue that only impacts our big cities. So yeah, we are on the ground. We would love for you all to be on the ground with us. As you all know, we got another kind of 4 weeks to get this done, and we need all hands on deck because we know going into next year, the real estate industry will spend so much money against us. So the more grassroots people power we can build now and not, just paid signature gatherers, the more powerful our campaign's going to be moving into next year.
There are a whole bunch of questions actually on your website to which you provide answers. And one of the questions that I think is very important. what about building? Why is
Yeah.
the housing crisis not going to be really affected until we can build a lot more housing? I mean, there's some obvious answers, but I think you have very specific answers to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this before. Like the housing crisis is not one thing, it is multiple crises coming together. And so we need many solutions. We are in a housing shortage in Massachusetts, particularly for folks at the lowest incomes. So we do need to build more. We need more funding for affordable housing. And we need to also make sure tenants and working class homeowners can stay in our communities. We can't wait for new construction for our communities to stay, right, when we hear these stories every day. So, I could get into more around how I think this is really all about corporate investors who are coming in, right? I mean,
Please
I
do.
think whether you talk about new construction, I mean, well, I'll say the things about rent control. I also have something to say about new construction with it, but on tenant protections, right. Ultimately, like we have a system that housing is about investor profit. It's not about housing people, right? It's about units and return on investment, not about like homes for people. So, I mean, that's a fundamental issue, right, in the system. And so, we see tenants, we see buildings being bought up by corporate landlords. We're seeing BlackRock come into Springfield. We're seeing, statewide players in places like Southbridge, Lunenburg, and those investors are not interested in housing everyday Massachusetts residents. They're interested in how much money they can get. I think the conversations around price fixing and RealPage or these AI systems actually really illustrates that, folks would often large landlords would rather leave a unit vacant if they think in 6 months they can get this much more through the kind of algorithm than renting it for less today, right? I think that speaks to the fact that it's not just about units and number of units, because this is actually an issue of um housing being a total commodity. So we do need to build more. We have a housing shortage. We particularly have that at the lowest incomes. And we understand that, this is really for us like an anti-corporate and an anti-gouging fight. And we want to see all kind of housing policy work move from just like let's build to build to like let's house our communities. And that means tenant protections, that means homeowner protections, that means things like tenant opportunity to purchase, as well as building more because of the housing shortage we're in.
Someone's asking uh, the right question about what are the opponents likely to throw at us? What are the arguments against when we're talking to
Yeah.
people about signing the
Yeah.
petition?
Do you want?
Will
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
this mean that everybody's property is going to deteriorate because landlords won't want to repair or spend any money?
Yeah.
Both of
Yeah.
you.
So I
That's
think
fine.
I think there's a few arguments and a few answers, right? One, which Carolyn got at, is like people will say, oh, well, this isn't, either, this isn't going to help us build housing or this is going to slow down the building of housing, right? This isn't a development policy, right? And so judging rent control and whether or not it builds new housing, right? Like, Medicare for all isn't going to cure cancer. That doesn't mean that we don't pass it, right? It's a different thing, right? This is one of the tools and we need to do a lot of other things. And we're working on a lot of those other things to make sure that we're building housing. And there's no research or data to support this idea that like rent control slows down development, right? If you actually look at the research, like that's just not backed up. That's not accurate. And so I think that's one of the big ones. I think another, you mentioned, Kathleen, this idea that like, oh, it's gonna lead to poorer housing conditions because landlords aren't going to be incentivized. But one, I say, raise your hand if you've lived in an apartment in Massachusetts in the last 20 years that has been in a state of disrepair, right? And rent control already wasn't there. And so I think that that's not accurate. And so I think that, again, this is not the rent control policy that existed in Boston in the 70s and the 80s. A 5% increase, cost of living increase, right? Like landlords are still going to be able to continue to make money under this. And so if they aren't doing the necessary repairs as it goes along, that's a landlord issue, not a profit issue. And so I think those are the big things. And again, it's worth noting that like we didn't invent rent control in Massachusetts, right? It exists in plenty of other places, and like the buildings are not crumbling, buildings are not falling to the ground, people are building. And so I think that these arguments don't really bear out when you look at the reality of what has happened under rent control and what this policy looks like. But yeah, those are the big ones, is that, this is, it's going to slow development, and it's, going to lead to disrepair, or it's going to lead to more housing discrimination, which is my favorite possible argument. When landlords say, oh, well, if landlords are going to be stuck with a tenant for longer, they're going to be more selective, and they're going to be less likely to pick, people of color to live in their units. And like, I don't know, if I was the other side, my main argument would be, if you make us do this, we're going to be more racist. But they can run with that one if they would like, which is kind of crazy to me. But
Well,
One other one I'll say, oh, sorry, Catherine.
please do it. I'm just pointing out the 10-year exemption for new
Exactly.
housing.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
designed to help spur development, not
Correct.
Exactly.
Right about that one.
not
I think the
discourage.
one other one is that it'll hurt small landlords the most. But I think, as we know, right, this is not saying landlords cannot raise rent. It's just about predictable rent increases for tenants. So, we don't feel like that's a good faith argument, but we do hear that one as well.
What about the argument that landlords are going to jack up the rent before this passes as a way of protecting themselves?
So the way the policy is drafted is the base rent is what the rent is going to be on January 1st of 2026. And that's a common feature of these policies. This is kind of like backdated base rent for that exact reason. So that landlords don't just jack it up beforehand. And so, I mean, I guess they could, theoretically jack it up, but then once the rent control sets in, they're probably gonna have to reduce rent. And so I don't know. So yeah, that's accounted for in the policy.
And you both know a lot about the research on rent stabilization where it's already happened. Could you address that a little bit and talk about how it affects small landlords? I mean, beyond the people who have a 4-unit owner-occupied dwelling, but how it affects rental housing in general where it's been enacted.
Yeah, so different places have different small landlord exemptions. Some of them have, defined small landlords as people with like 20 or fewer units, which is not my definition of a small landlord, but different places get to do different things. And what we know is that like these, what we really consider the small landlords, right, who we are thinking of when we are trying to protect them, are not the people that are doing these massive rent increases, right? They're not the ones jacking up the rent 10, 15, 20%. And that is why we have a bunch of small landlords that support this policy, because they know that this isn't going to impact them because they aren't the ones trying to gouge tenants. And also, these small landlords generally tend to be people that are living in the communities in which they are the landlord. And it is better for the whole community if people can stay, right? If new people aren't moving in and out all of the time, when you provide some stability and neighborhood stability and people get to stay, it creates tighter knit communities, it creates stronger and safer communities. And so it benefits everybody. And again, this is not the policy of before where it's like, oh, you can raise your rent $12 this year, right? Like a 5% increase on an apartment that's already $3,000 a month, if we're talking about Boston, and plenty of areas outside of Boston, that's still a significant amount of money, right? And like and so like they are not prohibited from making profit off of this by any stretch of the imagination, right? They're prohibited from gouging people.
Got it.
And we see the larger landlords are really the ones
Please.
doing it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I feel like people say, oh, the small landlords, but like the people who are raising rent year over year by over 5%. I mean, it's not exclusively true, but they tend to be the larger players anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Got that too. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Emma asked a good question. So the ballot question makes any violations of this subject to 93A, which is the consumer protection, which is which is a long way of saying the AG has the ability to enforce this. And you have the ability as an individual under 93A to get like treble damages for any violations. So the AG's office is ultimately going to
So
be
it'll be
responsible.
part of consumer protection generally.
Mhm.
Great. Oh, can you again talk about how people get a hold of a petition? Because it may well be that we're producing a whole lot of activism with this conversation, and we need we need 75,000 signatures by November 19th, don't we?
Yes. So it's a by location. So if you, I'm trying to see if I have the slide with the locations, but if you live in if you are in Boston regularly, you can go to the Field First office, which is 145 Tremont Street, during weekday hours for sure, some other hours to get materials. If you live in Western Mass, Springfield No One Leaves has petitions that they're coordinating getting out. Lynn United for Change for North Shore folks. Worcester, we have an organizer who's distributing out of Worcester Common Ground. So and then we have some folks, we can get you stuff from a site in Brockton and New Bedford. If you live in other regions, you should email that keep mass home at Gmail email, and we will figure out how to get you stuff, whether that's mailing it or some other way. So I think it's a little bit dependent on where you live, but we're happy, but we will figure out how to get it to you. Oh, and if you're in Boston, there's also a site in Dorchester and in Jamaica Plain, City Life and NECP's office. So
Are all
you
of these locations on your website?
the locations are not here. I'm putting this slide up. The locations are not all on the website just because we don't, if you could give me sharing access, we don't want people to just show up at people's offices when they may not be ready for them. But for you all, for a group to share, yeah, NECP, Springfield, No One Leaves. These are kind of the core offices, but we also have Worcester, Brockton, New Bedford. We have sites that are open less frequently, but we can get you stuff.
Great. And
So
can
I'll leave
Jean,
this up for a moment.
good. And Jean Krieger, can you, if you haven't already, can you put into the chat that mailing address that you showed me last night?
Yep.
Yes, the mailing address is my office address. We are doing most of the you know work out of the Field First office, but they're both downtown Boston. So I think the easiest is just to email keepmasshome at
Good.
Gmail and me for any follow-up questions. But yeah, and if people want to share where they live now, if they're ready to go, we can also work out some specifics for folks.
And I'll just put in a plug because I think it was so excellent. We have an explanation from Brian Muldoon, who's the chair of the stipend reform campaign. Jonathan Heck, do you know whether that's up on the Kroll website? How you go about getting petition signatures and what cannot happen on a petition, what disqualifies them?
That's on the Leaf website.
It's on
Right.
which one? On LEAP?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Sti-
John, will
stipend-
you address that?
yep, I'll put it in the chat.
That's great guidance for signature gatherers for any kind of ballot question because it turns out that some little mistake on a petition can disqualify the signatures you've gotten. So let's tell people
Yeah.
about that too.
And we also have, I mean, some of you all are a lot of you all are trained um from the other ballot questions, but we do also have more trainings coming up. I'm just trying to pull that now.
It's not
but-
rocket science, but it turns out that there's things there are stray marks on a petition which can get the signatures thrown out. So you need to be careful when you're doing this.
Mhm. So, wait, let's see. I think we may have phased out all the trainings. Oh no, we still have more. Here's a Google form if you want to go to a training with us. So you're welcome to join us for that if that's helpful.
Thank you, Emma. You've answered a lot of the questions that I had for you. So if other questions are relevant and someone wants to put them in the chat, we'll be glad to address them. But otherwise, we can end early. This was, for me at least, hugely valuable and a very important issue right now, since we've got, just a little over a month to get all these signatures. Thank you, Carolyn, for that. And the chat has been very helpful too. Anything more? If we've left something out that you need to, that's a burning question, you can also, of course, Carolyn and Mark, would you put your emails in here too? You can email either one of them with further questions that you may have or that occur to you. For us, this is why PDM exists, to help all of us find out more about what we need to know, how to make progressive policies happen in Massachusetts, how to do more at this fraught moment in the state we live in. All politics isn't necessarily local, but a lot of it is. And we can't necessarily defang Trump, but I'm hoping nature will take its course. But in any event, we can do what we can do in our little patch of garden, and I think we're doing a lot. And I think thanks to Carolyn and Mark, very good things are happening here. So grateful to all of you, and thank you for spending part of your Friday morning with us. And this, as I say, this will be on our site, and there are also some links on the site as well. We can add to those. And there you go. If we can stop recording, that's a good moment. I don't see any more questions in here. So thank you. Take care. Bye, everyone. Good luck
Thanks,
to us all.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.